On the Choose to Think podcast, I will encourage and empower you to engage and optimize your best thought life in practical, meaningful ways so that you can live day by day in joy, peace, and God's purpose despite all externals. This is Victoria, and welcome back to the Choose to Think podcast. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome, everybody, to the Choose to Think podcast. This is a special mastermind on Clubhouse, the drop-in audio chat app. And today we are discussing the words mindset. And you're probably thinking, okay, what does that mean? What is the words mindset? So I'm going to unpack that for you today. And I'll tell you that I'm inspired by Dr. Caroline Leaf's book called Think, Learn, Succeed. She lists several different mindsets there, and I've been choosing one each week to discuss on Clubhouse and to invite anyone who wants to come to kind of chime in and give some feedback. Sometimes we mastermind or we put our heads together and think of tips that we might actually employ or put on these particular mindsets and wear them as often as possible. So the one for today is the words mindset. You know, the words are the fruit of our thoughts. So just think about that for a minute. The words that we speak are the fruit of our thoughts. And there are so many scripture verses that we could use. And I'll just say right now, this is kind of the heartbeat of my Choose to Think ministry, because we do need to think about our thoughts, because what we think matters, and in turn what we think affects what we say. It also affects how we feel or the emotions and moods we have, as well as ultimately our behavior. So all of this is I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe we get to chat about this today, because it's really a powerful kind of topic to engage. And then, you know, times a billion, the power that we literally have in our brains to influence our thought, to train our thoughts, to speak life over others and over ourselves, to agree with the truth of what God says. All of that we can do. All of that starts with our thoughts. So a couple of scriptures that I do want to read, one of them, and we'll kind of unpack these as we go as well, but in Romans 12:2 it says, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." And then in 2 Corinthians 10, verses 3 through 5, it says, "For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not of the flesh, but divinely powerful for the destruction of fortresses. We are destroying speculations and every lofty thing raised up against the knowledge of God. And we are taking every thought captive to the obedience of Christ." And I could keep going. One of my, favorite ones here is from Psalm 19:14, and it says this: "May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in your sight, Lord, my rock and my redeemer." So just with that backdrop in mind, what Dr. Leaf teaches is that the words we speak are reflective, of course, of our thoughts. That's what I said at the beginning. The words are the fruit of our thoughts. And when we speak words, we have an opportunity to actually reinforce memories that we have. And it's kind of like the words are giving feedback to the memories that we have. Also, she goes into some of the neuroscience, as a neuroscientist that she is, she goes into some of the actual scientific research that's been done on the power of our words and what's actually going on in our brains. So if we speak negative words, we're actually creating or reinforcing those negative chemicals. Those are being released. And what happens from there is it strengthens the negative memories. and we reinforce those negative thoughts. And eventually we get caught in this cycle, this negative cycle or stronghold that is all going so quickly in our brains, where we've got the words, the chemicals, the memories, the thoughts, and it's just looping around over and over and over again. But the incredible good news about this is that if that happens with negative words and negative thoughts and negative chemicals, guess what? The same thing happens when we have positive speech, positive words. And Dr. Leaf spends some time talking about it's not enough just to say positive things. For example, even with affirmations, if I say something like, I am wonderful, but inside I feel like I'm not wonderful. That would be the last thing I feel like I am or believe I am. Or I am forgiven. If I say that and I affirm that, but I don't really believe it. In other words, if the subconscious is not lined up properly to what I'm actually saying and speaking, then it can actually create something that's called cognitive dissonance. It's when what we actually say doesn't line up with what we really feel. So we want to be careful there. In other words, it's not enough to just go around being, like, okay, I'm happy, and Miss Pollyanna, and always very positive, if indeed inside we don't believe those things. So we have to have honest thinking. And a better way to iterate those sorts of things, like maybe God says I'm wonderful, so I want to be wonderful, I want to think I'm wonderful, I want to believe these things, but I just don't, is to perhaps use the word like becoming. And maybe wonderful isn't the best example of that, but one I have used often is when I get to doing these burpee things for my exercise regime, and it's just so hard for me to do those, I found myself telling myself things like, I can't do this, I hate these are horrible, I'll never get better. Those sorts of things, those sorts of words were coming out of my mouth, and instead I reframed that into, I am becoming stronger every day. I'm approaching what it is that I want to actually be. And that I could actually say truthfully, because I did think that doing this exercise was strengthening my muscles and improving my health. So I could say in honesty that, hey, I'm getting stronger every day. I want to read a little bit of her text here, where she says, and I'm quoting now, the words you speak are electromagnetic and quantum life forces that come from the thoughts inside your brain, which you build into your mind by thinking, feeling, and choosing over time. And again, for as much as we have these negative feedback loops in our brains, that took time to get those there. And so we're trying to replace those with positive, truth-filled, and honest words and thoughts, and that too can take a long time. She also goes on to say, every time you utter a negative statement, you release negative quantum energy and upset the balance of peptides, which affects the environment of the brain and puts the body into toxic stress. I'm going to stop and just pause for a moment and invite Rebecca C. Wilcox, who joins me often in Clubhouse. I just love it. She provides such value and always has something so awesome to share. If you, Rebecca, would like to come in at this point, as I've been just kind of piecing through this words mindset, what it means and how we kind of develop that, and we'll go into that a little bit more in a moment. But what are you thinking so far at this point, Rebecca? What's coming up in your mind?
One of the things that I think about that I've read is that whether you think you can or think you can't, you're correct. And this morning, my scripture that I wrote on was on Mark 11:24. And it says, therefore, I tell you, whatever you ask in prayer, believe that you have received it and it will be yours. And my thinking on that, first off, was have faith and boldly ask for what I want. And the brain that God gave me will use the RAS, that reticular activating system, to start validating these desires. But my next statement was, walking with God, my asks will be in alignment with his purpose for my life. And that's what I find so interesting, is how he can mold us, or how he's molding me. And I feel like he's just shifting me along on this stream. And it just, because honestly for me, I've had thoughts, and they still show up. Those LBs is what I call them, those limiting beliefs that lurk in the shadows of our brain, and they're not in alignment with what God thinks of me or you, but they're in alignment with what somebody said to us in our formative years, those birth through 7 years old, or even later, comments that were made that reconfirmed that thought, or a situation that we were in that reconfirmed that thought. And I'm just thankful that in these last 6 years now, I have been working on and realizing that my thoughts, I can take them captive, and they can become positive and powerful for my purpose in my life, and those 3 P's. So that's really my thinking to this point so far in what you've been sharing about all of this. Thank you, Victoria.
You're quite welcome, Rebecca. And I like how you brought purpose into the mix here, because that is critically important. Matter of fact, I heard once that the opposite of depression isn't like happiness or fulfillment or whatever. It is rather purpose. So our purpose, our calling, the giftings that God has given us, and stepping into those often just opens our world completely. And suddenly we can begin to, for me anyway, once I realized and accepted the calling and the gifts that God had given me, the calling and the purpose he had upon my life, it was so exciting to me. And it brought some new thoughts, a new way of thinking into the foreground, perhaps that I had not explored before. And suddenly I knew that I had to deal with all the junk thoughts and beliefs that, that I had been operating in previously. So purpose, I think, really is important, in an important element of this whole process. I will say also, Dr. Caroline Leaf goes on to say this, and I'm quoting, "Framing your world with your words involves replacing negative thinking and words by changing your word mindset. When you start speaking positive words that are rooted in honest thinking," and don't miss that, if there's anything I have to emphasize, it would be that element, because I was stuck in patterns of cognitive dissonance, that is cognitive incongruence, or non-alignment. I was stuck in that. For example, even I'll say, like, some of the worship songs, I would be standing in church and, worshiping and praising the Lord, and a song would come on and I would sing those lyrics, but inside I did not mean them. For example, one of the songs was, "You're all I want, you're all I need. You're all I want, you're all I need." I don't know if you know that song, Rebecca, but it's just a beautiful old song. And every time that would come on, I would say those words, but inside I would think, that's just not true. Lord, I want a lot of other things, and certainly you're not all that I want, Lord. I want, and yeah, I need you, but I need a whole lot of other things too. But yet I continue to say those words and sing that song, though I did not believe it. So unwittingly, what I was creating in my brain, Dr. Leaf might go on to say, was damaging to my brain, was actually brain damage, because what I was saying did not line up with what I actually believed on the inside. So it's not enough to say, Lord, you're all I want, and Lord, you're all I need, which are positive things to say and are coming from scriptures in the Bible. It's not enough just to say that. We have to really, really believe it. And if we don't believe it, we can always ask the Lord to guide us in this process and to help us with any area of unbelief we may have in our relationship with Him, or any type of, if we have like a little bit of a in our spirit, like I just can't go there. We just need to be honest and say that to the Lord. Lord, your word says this, but gosh, I really don't believe that right now. And can you help me with this issue that I'm having with this area of unbelief? So again, we have to start speaking positive words that are rooted in honest thinking. That is when we destroy the old toxic memory. And let me keep reading here. We destroy the old toxic memory and grow a beautiful new memory to replace the painful and oppressive one. She goes on to say, of course, you will still remember what happened to you in the past, but the memory has been reconceptualized. It no longer rules your life. Instead, it becomes a rich part of your character. I wish she would have given a few examples on this in her book. She does reiterate that congruent thinking, not positive words, creates the necessary changes in the brain. She uses an affirmation like, I am brilliant and successful. And she says that will backfire if you don't truly, deeply believe it at the non-conscious level. That is one example that she does give in this chapter.
The only thing I was thinking, I don't know that I have, if this is tied in exactly with what you were just speaking about, but when you were talking about earlier, what you say, was it the becoming?
Yes, it was like I am becoming stronger every day.
Right. And what I'm saying or using is if there's something that I cannot do, I always say, I haven't figured that out, not yet. And I use not yet a lot because that's just the encouragement that I need, that I will be able to. I will be able to do whatever it is, think whatever it is, become whatever it is. That it's just a process for me instead of oh, I just can't do that, or whatever that non-belief that I'm holding on to, that non-truth that I'm holding on to is.
Yep. Very good. I love that. And similar to that, I've heard this, and I bet you have too, as entrepreneurs or as anyone really trying to set out and do something maybe you've never done before. For example, I'm a writer, and even the gentleman who wrote started the whole Chicken Soup for Your Souls, Kane, is that his last name? I think, is it Jack Kane? And he received, I believe, 140 rejection letters for his idea to do Chicken Soup for the Soul, until finally he landed it and got the yes. And so I heard him say once that just all of those rejection letters were simply saying, not right now. And that's kind of what you were saying, not yet, but not now. It's not that they're just outright rejecting, but it's not now. And some people may say, well, that's just silly. Just accept that it's a rejection letter and get on with it. But I love the thought of reframing that a little bit, because if I were to just assume all of that, quote, rejection, it kind of gets a little bit suffocating to me and stifling, and it shifts the focus onto, I don't know, this negative bend that could quickly put me in a tailspin. tailspin going in the wrong direction. And so I have not found that helpful. Even the word rejection letter, yes, I understand that a publisher may not want this particular idea. Maybe that doesn't jive with them. Maybe 1,000 things. Maybe someone else made the decision and you got the end of it. Maybe it was late on a day and the person was ill. I mean, a gazillion reasons why you may get the no, and it could be poor writing. Of course it could. And maybe there's areas to improve, but to say, I'm attempting and I'm stepping out and I'm willing to get in the ring on this because God gifted me in this area and He does have a purpose for me and I'm willing to do it, then I'm just going to take that as a not now and trust God and His timing. So I like the not yet also in the sense of, okay, maybe I can't do that right now. I can't do it yet, but I'm going to keep trying and keep extending my effort. And I think that's probably a really good recipe for success and for that mindset that would allow you to persevere and persist at doing something that's worthwhile to you, something you value. So I like that very much too. Our words can really just... I love that they're the fruit, because the Bible also tells us that out of our mouths is a reflection of what's in our heart. And so if you've ever said something really like, yikes, why did I say that? It might give you an opportunity to examine and spend some time with the Lord and examine what's really going on in your heart. And so that's also another element. She doesn't go quite very much into that in her chapter. She does give some activation tips, some words, mindset activation tips. She just gives a few, and she first says, hey, you got to acknowledge that there's an issue. When you start observing the words that you're speaking and the impact that they have on you, you've got to recognize that, be aware of that there is that connection there. And she says to examine your words and compare them to the thoughts from which they originated. So again, it's thinking about what you're thinking about, and taking those thoughts captive is you kind of, in order to analyze them, you've got to nail them down first. So when it says take them captive, I categorize my thoughts often and see if there's any root issue or root connection, and I kind of try to bring them together, and then I can, more readily examine exactly what it is I'm thinking, those thoughts and those words that I may not be saying out loud, but I may simply be saying to myself. And then she encourages everyone to practice going into that superposition. She talks about that a lot in order to give yourself almost like an external perspective. It's almost like a perspective that you might get from a mentor or a friend. I like to look at it like that. And so be honest with yourself as you're doing that, and as you're considering what you're actually thinking about and what the words are that you're saying, and as you're examining them and thinking about what might be wrong or what is right about what you're saying, just pull yourself out of any emotionally charged scenario to try to analyze all of that, and then consider who you are becoming and focus on your progress as you go. And then finally, she encourages everyone to replace those negative statements with positive ones. And as well, she encourages us all to put feelings into words, because apparently that has a tremendous therapeutic effect on our mind and our brain. So sometimes we notice that we're feeling something, and just the articulation of our feeling, like, gee, I'm really frustrated right now. Suddenly that lifts the cap off and allows some steam to come through and releases some of those, like the cortisol that may be beginning to streak through your system. It's a little bit of a relief mechanism there in that release of simply acknowledging and stating out loud, I feel sad right now. I'm really struggling. Just acknowledging where you are and how you're feeling is of tremendous benefit as well. So Rebecca, as we kind of wrap this up, any final thoughts or feedback?
The word that is part of all of this, and it is taking action. And when you're first, a lot of people, they don't want to look at what they think and what they say. They just, this is just me. This is the way I'm going to be. And I think part of it is because they're afraid. It is hard. It is hard when we realize, oh, I really shouldn't have thought that about them. And one thing that I'm just encouraging the people that I'm around is be honest about it, and just, this is what I do. When I have that negative thought, even if it's about myself or someone else, I go, Lord, that's not how I want this to go. Can you help me to next time pause and use the words that you would use, the thoughts that you would use? Because for me, these thoughts just, man, they will pop up so darn fast, faster than the blink of an eye, and there they are. But yes, just be honest about it. Look at them honestly. Go, I really don't like that. I really want it to be different. But until you start taking action, being proactive with your thoughts and what you're actually thinking and what you're actually saying in them, that's the only time that things will start making a change. But if you just say, no, this is just the way I am, this is the way I think, then nothing will ever change in your life.
Taking action is so critically important. And I was thinking, as you were talking, why are people afraid? Why are they fearful to actually be honest and analyze? And maybe it could be that they're afraid because they're embarrassed because of some of the thoughts that they have. And we should also say that thoughts in and of themselves aren't sinful. Emotions aren't sinful. And they're indicative of a condition of our heart. But we sometimes, like Rebecca said, they come so quickly that we can't even control them. Things just kind of pop into our heads, and we're like, oh, where did that come from? Or why am I having that thought? And I suppose that, as Jesus speaks about lust in your heart and those sorts of things, that would be that internal kind of those fleshly drives that we may have that could certainly lead to sin, and in a way would, I suppose, be considered sinful in and of themselves when you get stuck in those thoughts that are not godly, and you get stuck in those emotions that are somehow they're bringing you down, and they're not helpful or healthy for you because you're kind of stuck there. Then that would be time for change, and time for, okay, this is coming into my mind here. I got to do something about this. So, but why would people be afraid to look at what they're feeling? I think, as I said, maybe they're embarrassed, maybe they're shocked, maybe they're ashamed by what they're thinking. And there is hope for that, because once we do take that action and we begin down the road of learning the art or the discipline of taking our thoughts captive, that's when, once we recognize what we're thinking about and we reject anything that's not true or that's a lie, and it may be that we have some shocking thought that pops into our head and we just say, nope, not going there, because we know it's not godly. Maybe we have a lustful thought and we're like, not going there, because that's of no benefit here. And so we kind of weigh the costs of what it might be or mean to actually engage in a thought that is really going to take us into the wrong direction. We can begin to say, nope, not going there. And so we have our resistor gets stronger, and the rejection ability that we have in our brain and our mind, as we train ourselves in this discipline, it gets stronger and stronger and stronger. The more we exercise it, the stronger it gets. And then after that, we have to replace those thoughts with God's truth. And it may just simply be, that's not of the Lord. Lord, your word says this about my sexual life, or your word says this about my relationships, or your word says this. That's a very quick way to replace that thought. And then what's happening is, like letter R, I'm using all these R's. Number 4 would be that renewal process is actually happening. Those chemicals are changing in our brains. We are rewiring our brains to a way that is healthy and productive and more positive and energizing for us, and healthier to help us achieve that optimal emotional health that we're looking for. And then finally, we have to repeat this process. And this process of recognizing what you're thinking about, rejecting or resisting those lies or things that are not of God, replacing them with God's truth about Himself, you, and what He says about your scenario and what He says about others, all of that replacement goes on. The renewal then happens. And that repetition, you just have to do that over and over. And then it gets easier and easier and easier. And I always like to conclude with 2 final R's, which are actually relying on God in this entire process. You're not alone as you're trying to focus on the words that you're saying and the thoughts that you're having. You are not alone in that process. You have a spirit inside you to help you and to guide you and to comfort you every step of the way. And then the last R is that you can rest. You can rest knowing that God's going to do the healing work that you need and that He's going to do all of the heavy lifting here. You do get a choice, though. You do get to choose to think. You can choose your thoughts. You can choose your words. And sometimes we feel like, nope, that just came right out of my mouth. And I know it goes lightning fast. And believe me, I have said things in my lifetime that if I could have taken them back in a heartbeat, I would have done it. But we can choose. And so if you feel like sometimes the words that you're speaking are this kind of gut reaction or this, like boom, impulsive kind of responses and reactions that you're having, then you may want to do a little bit more heart work and try to figure out what's going on and why so readily and so easily were you able to say what you said. But there is hope. And in Philippians, God is very clear about what we should think about. In Philippians 4, he says, listen, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is of good repute, if there is any excellence and if anything worthy of praise, dwell on these things or think about these things. And gratitude is another really important aspect of this. And in 1 Thessalonians 5:16 it says, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, and everything give thanks, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. And so with all of this, I would encourage you, listener, to start thinking about what you're thinking about. Think about the words that you're declaring. Your words are powerful. They're likened to a ship's rudder. They can direct the very course of your life. They're likened to a spark that can set a whole forest on fire. Our words can bring life or death, and our words can indicate a lot about the condition of our heart. So thank you so much for tuning in today and for just going over this. And if you'd ever like any more help with this, I'd be glad to reach out and help. I have a whole lot of things on my website, downloadables, printables, like the 5 R's to Taking Thoughts Captive. That's a little infographic. I have the Ultimate Gratitude Guide, my signature freebie, all on my website at victoriadwalker.com. And I thank you so much for tuning in today. God bless you. And that's a wrap, Brain Changer. Thank you so much for tuning in. And say, if you like what you hear, please consider sharing this link to the show with a friend or a family member who you think might be encouraged by the inspiring and hope-filled messages that I try to put out every single week. So thank you so much for your support. And until next time, Dios primero y que Dios te bendiga. Ciao.